My story is not unique in its pain, but I believe it is singular in its slow and sacred reconstruction. I will speak it to you plainly without the varnish of hindsight, for the raw truth holds a power that perfected narratives often lack. My story begins not with a wedding, but in the quiet middle of a marriage that from the outside appeared as solid and admirable as the colonial house we shared on its tree-lined street in a postcard-perfect Midwestern town. There was my husband, David, an architect with calm demeanor and capable hands. There were our two children, Lily, all fierce intelligence and burgeoning teenage angst, and Ben, a quiet boy with a deep soul and a love for all creatures with more than 4 legs. There was Sunny, our loyal golden retriever, whose affection was the one unquestionable constant in our home. I had built a career in marketing, one I was proud of, one that engaged my mind and provided a sense of self beyond our front door. We were the couple others referenced at dinner parties. With a hint of envy, they would say David and Alina seemed to have it all figured out. We presented a united front, a team, a life built on shared history and mutual respect. Or so I believed for so very long. The dismantling of that life was not an event, it was a process so gradual I became anesthetized to its progression. The signs were not dramatic betrayals, but subtle erosions. He traveled more for work. He said the projects were larger, the clients more demanding, the weekends he spent home became preoccupied with a new hobby, woodworking in the garage, where the sound of the saw drowned out the possibility of conversation. Our dinners, once a time for sharing the minutiae of our days, became functional fairs with the children as buffers after which he would retreat to his study, and I to a book or the glow of my laptop. I told myself this was the natural evolution of a long marriage, the passionate fire banked into comfortable embers. I told myself we were building a legacy, focusing on the children, on our careers, on the tangible assets of our life. I became a curator of our happiness, meticulously arranging activities and vacations and holiday photos that proved our family was whole and thriving. I poured myself into the logistics of living, because in the quiet spaces between the doing, a cold dread would begin to coil in my stomach. The discovery was almost absurd in its mundanity. It was a Sunday evening, and I was performing my weekly ritual of gathering laundry. I was in our walk-in closet, a space that still held the mingled scents of us, his cedar, his sandalwood, my lavender. I was checking the pockets of his jackets, a habit born of rescuing countless gum wrappers, and loose change, my fingers in the pocket of his good gray wool blazer, the one he wore for client presentations, brushed against a small, stiff piece of paper. I pulled it out. It was a receipt from a jeweler in the city. I knew the name, an elegant boutique. Place, the date was from 2 months prior. The item was a sapphire pendant necklace. The price made my breath catch. My birthday had passed 6 weeks before that date. He had given me a beautiful cashmere scarf in a box from a department store. I had been touched by the thoughtfulness. Now the receipt felt like ice in my hand. I stood there in the quiet hum of the house, the children watching television downstairs, him in the garden, and the world. I knew the world I had painstakingly maintained simply crystallized and then silently shattered. I did not confront him immediately. I carried the receipt downstairs, placed it in the drawer of my bedside table, and lay awake all night staring at the ceiling. My mind raced through a catalog of recent months, his distracted air, his new phone, passcode, the unexplained late nights at the office. I had explained it all away, given him the benefit of every doubt, clung to the narrative of a hardworking man under pressure. Now a different terrible narrative was writing itself in bold, dark strokes the next evening. After the children were in bed, I asked him to sit down in the living room. I retrieved the receipt and placed it on the coffee table between us. He looked at it, and then he looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not surprise, not panic, but a profound and weary resignation. The confession, when it came, was delivered not with tears or pleading, but with a chilling clinical calm. There was someone else, a colleague from a firm he often collaborated with. It had been going on for over a year. He spoke of a connection he had missed, a feeling unseen in our marriage, of finding a simplicity and excitement with her. His words were not meant to be cruel, I see that now, but they were precise, and they were final. He was already gone. He said he had been for a long time. He wanted a divorce. He had already consulted a lawyer. The ground did not just fall away from beneath me. It dissolved. The following days were a blur of surreal and agonizing rituals. Telling our children was a torment that will live in the marrow of my bones. Forever. Lily, her face a mask of betrayed fury, screamed that we were liars, that her entire childhood was a fraud, before slamming her bedroom door so hard the house shook. Ben, simply went very, very still, his eyes large. And wounded, he curled into my side, a little boy seeking shelter from a storm he could not understand. Our home, our beautiful, carefully curated home, instantly became a museum of my failure. Every object, every piece of furniture we had chosen together, every photograph on the walls screamed of the life that was now revealed as a carefully constructed illusion. The legal process was a brutal education in the dismantling of a shared universe. We opted for mediation, which was billed as the civilized choice. And it was a civilized form of emotional evisceration. We sat in a beige room with a pleasant woman who helped us dismember 22 years of intertwined life. The house, the retirement accounts, the investment, portfolios, the value of my car versus is the cost of the children's extracurricular activities. It was all reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. Parenting plan was the most difficult negotiation of all, parsing our children's lives into weekends and holidays and summer weeks, as if dividing precious jewels. The numbness that first enveloped me was a mercy, but it began to thin, revealing a raw, chaotic landscape of emotion beneath grief. Was not a single thing, it was a roiling tempest of sorrow. So deep it felt oceanic of anger. So hot it scared me of a fear about the future, so vast it was paralyzing. My social world underwent a seismic shift. Friends I had known for decades, couples we had vacationed with, simply faded away. Some made awkward overtures to me alone. But the invitations for dinners and parties dried up. The coupled world has no comfortable space for a newly single woman, especially one whose husband left for someone else. It is an unconscious bias, but a palpable one. I felt like a ghost at the feast of other people's intact marriages. But in that clearing away, my true friends revealed themselves with a fierceness that still brings tears to my eyes. Sarah from my long-ago book club became my fortress. She called every day. She showed up with groceries, with wine, with trashy magazines. She did not try to fix me. She simply bore witness to the wreckage. She was the friend who sat with me in silence, who let me rage, who handed me tissues, and never once said, "You are better off without him." Because she understood I was not better off. I was devastated. My parents from Florida, my sweet, well-meaning parents, offered to come stay indefinitely. But I knew I had to find my footing alone. I had to learn to be the adult in my own life without a partner to lean on. I developed a strict internal protocol for survival. I allowed myself to fall apart, but only in designated times and places. I granted myself 20 minutes of unfettered weeping in the shower each morning, where the sound of the water could mask my sobs. Then I would step out, dry off, put on my armor of professional attire, and make breakfast for my children. I would drive them to school with a smile, ask about their day, and then pull over a block away to steady my breathing before heading to work. My job became my sanctuary, a place where I was not David's soon-to-be ex-wife, or Lily and Ben's heartbroken mother. I was a leaner Rose, vice president of marketing, a woman known for her clear thinking and creative campaigns. I clung to that professional identity. It was a life raft in a churning sea. But before we continue, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Subscribe the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories, and comment down below which city you are watching us from right now. Let's continue. The nights were a different kind of wilderness. After the kids were asleep, the silence in the house was a physical presence, a heavy blanket of absence. I wandered from room to room, haunted by the ghost of the family we had been. I would find myself standing in the doorway of his empty study, or staring at his side of the bed. Now neatly made, sleep became a distant country I could not reach. I read voraciously about grief, about attachment theory, about the psychology of divorce. I sought understanding like a lifeline, thinking if I could intellectually comprehend the pain, I could somehow control it. I began to see a therapist, Dr. Ames, a woman with kind eyes and a calm voice, who gave me the first tool that truly helped start a journal. She said, "Do not edit, do not judge, just put the storm on paper." The early pages of that journal are chaotic and dark. They are filled with sentences like I am a hollow bone. Today, I saw his car at the grocery store, and my hands shook so badly I dropped my keys. I hate him, I hate her, I hate myself for not seeing it. How will I ever trust anyone again? Slowly, over weeks and months, the entries began to change. They became longer, more reflective. I found myself writing not just about the pain of the end, but about the beginning, about the man I fell in love within. College, his quick smile, his ambition, our shared dreams of building a life. I wrote about the slow, insidious drift, The conversations that turned transactional, the vacations, where we were more focused on the itinerary. Then on each other, I wrote about the parts. I played the parts I ignored. Dr. Ames called this narrative reconstruction. You are not rewriting history. She explained you are reclaiming your own story from the wreckage. Your feelings are not your enemies, Alina. They are data. The rage is data. The despair is data. The flickering moments of relief when he is gone for the weekend are data. Collect the data without judgment. About 8 months after David left, I hit a strange and frustrating plateau. The acute, agonizing pain had subsided into a constant low-grade ache. I was functioning. I was even having days where I laughed and meant it. But I felt profoundly stuck. I was in a gray, waiting room of my own life. I had been David's wife for half my life. My identity, my social role, my future plans were all built around that central fact. Who was I without that? Dr. Ames asked me a question during one session that echoes in my mind to this day. What did you love before him? What made your heart sing before your identity became intertwined with his? The question stunned me with its simplicity and its difficulty. I had met David at 22. My entire adult identity had been formed in partnership. I had to travel back in time to my teenage years, to my early college self. I remembered a girl who lived for the piano, who could lose entire afternoons in the practice rooms working through a difficult Chopin nocturne. I had not played since my senior recital. I remembered a girl who was enthralled by the Italian Renaissance, who dreamed of seeing Florence and Rome. I remembered a girl who loved the solitude of long walks in the woods, who found peace in the rhythm of her own footsteps. That weekend, driven by a mix of defiance and desperation, I went to a large music store. I wandered the keyboard aisle feeling like an imposter. My hands, which had once flown over keys, felt clumsy and unfamiliar. I bought a simple digital piano, a modest instrument, and brought it home. Setting it up in the living room, where his favorite chair had once sat, felt like a radical act of reclamation. That first night with the children at David's, I sat on the bench, my heart pounding. I placed my fingers on the cool plastic keys and played a C major scale. The sound was thin and artificial, but it was a sound I had made. I tried a simple piece from my childhood, my fingers fumbling the melody. Tears came then. But they were different. They were not just for the lost marriage. They were for the lost girl, for the passion I had let slip away in the busyness of building a shared life. I made a vow to myself to play every night, even if only for 15 minutes. The piano became my confessional, my therapist. My friend, I could pour my sorrow into a minor key, my anger into a crashing chord progression, my fragile hope into a gentle rising melody. It was not an escape. It was the most honest conversation I was having. Concurrent with this internal exploration came a monumental external decision. The colonial house with its perfect lawn and its haunted rooms had to go. It was a beautiful shell, but the echoes within it were too loud, too painful. Selling it felt like a necessary amputation, terrifying, but ultimately freeing. My realtor, Maria, a warm, no-nonsense woman who had navigated her own divorce, understood completely. She did not show me replicas of my old life. She found me a townhouse in a neighborhood closer to the city. It was smaller, but it was filled with light from large windows, and the rooms were empty, blank canvases with no history. The process of moving was exhausting and profoundly cathartic. I purged with a ruthless clarity, donating furniture that held memories, selling the dining set we had saved for years, letting go of the physical weight of that shared past. I empowered Lily and Ben to shape our new SB. Ace Lily painted her room a deep oceanic blue, a color she said felt like diving into calm water. Ben chose a vibrant galactic green, and we spent a weekend sticking glow in the dark stars on his ceiling in precise constellations. We were not just moving houses, we were building a new home, a sanctuary defined by us alone. My restoration was not a straight path upward. It was a spiral where I would circle back to old pains, but hopefully from a slightly higher vantage point each time. Co-parenting with David settled into a rhythm of polite, sterile efficiency. We communicated primarily through a shared digital calendar and terse text exchanges, solely about logistics. Seeing him move on, build a new life with the woman who had been the other woman, was a specific and recurring agony. It was a fresh wound every time the children mentioned her name or talked about their time at his new apartment. The greatest discipline of my life was to separate my own seething hurt from my children's absolute need to love their father unconditionally. I made a sacred vow never to speak ill of him to Lily and Ben. I would listen to their stories about his place, their outings with him. and I would nod and ask questions, showing interest in their happiness. I would say things like, "I am so glad you had fun with your dad," or "That sounds like a great adventure with him." This was not a natural act, it was a conscious, daily sacrifice of my own bitterness on the altar of their emotional security. I saw the relief it gave them, the way it freed them to love both of their parents without guilt or conflict. It was the hardest and most important work I did. I began to deliberately seek out experiences that stretched me, that forced me out of the familiar shell of my grief. Sarah, finally, after months of gentle pressure, convinced me to join her weekend hiking group. The first hike was a 5-mile loop through a rugged state park. I was woefully unprepared, my lungs burned, my legs screamed, and I lagged behind the group, consumed by embarrassment and physical misery. But I kept putting one foot in front of the other, and when we finally broke through the tree line, a summit overlooking a valley painted in the explosive golds and reds of fall, a feeling broke through the constant gray fog of my heart. It was awe, simple, unadulterated, awe, the vastness of the landscape, the ancient stillness of the rocks, the indifferent beauty of it, all put my human pain into a perspective that was strangely comforting. The forest did not care about my divorce. It simply was enduring and majestic. I started going regularly, the rhythm of walking, the sound of my own breath, and the crunch of leaves underfoot became a moving meditation. My body grew stronger, and with it so did my resolve. 1 year after the divorce papers were signed and finalized a date, I marked not with ceremony, but with a quiet sigh. I did something audacious. I booked a solo trip to Italy. I armed myself with guidebooks and my old art history texts, and a brand new empty journal. For 10 days. I was just a woman traveling alone. I wandered the halls of the Uffizi in Florence, and stood before Botticelli's Primavera. For so long a guard began to watch me curiously. I was not crying from sadness, but from the overwhelming presence of transcendent beauty. I remembered that college girl, and felt a long dormant part of my soul stir back to life. I ate dinner alone at small trattorias, initially hyper-aware of the empty chair opposite me, but gradually learning to savor the food, to watch the world go by, to be a joyful observer of life. I got lost in Venice, not just geographically, but in time, in the labyrinth of canals and history, stumbling upon a tiny shop that sold handmade marbled paper. I bought a journal covered in swirling blues and golds, and began to fill it not with grief, but with sketches of doorways, descriptions of the light on ancient stone, fragments of poetry that came to me. I was consciously curating beauty, collecting evidence that the world was still a wondrous place. Back home, the dual tracks of my life continued, the necessary and mundane responsibilities of motherhood and career, and this quiet internal revolution that was reshaping my very core. My relationship with Lily deepened in unexpected ways. As she witnessed my struggle and my growth, she saw me wrestle with a flat tire using a YouTube tutorial. She heard me practice the same piano passage 50 times. She listened to me talk about my awkward first dates, not with pity, but with a newfound respect. One evening, she said to me, "Mom, I know it was awful, but in a weird way, I am proud of how you are now. You are like a real person, not just my mom." It was the highest compliment my teenage daughter could have given. My career, too, began to blossom in this new soil, freed from the constant emotional drain of a dying marriage. I found a reservoir of focus and creativity. I spearheaded a major rebranding project at work that was risky and ambitious. It succeeded beyond expectations, leading to a promotion and significant financial recognition. The independence that came from earning and managing my own money became a point of deep concrete pride, a tangible result of my own labor and resilience. 2.5 years into my new life, I had a mundane yet profound realization. I had not cried over the loss of David or our marriage in over 2 months. The grief had not vanished, that would be untrue, but it had transmuted. It was no longer a tenant living rent-free in my chest. It was a visitor that came and went with less frequency and far less destructive force. I had built a full life, a mosaic crafted piece by piece from my own choices. My community was no longer based on coupledom, but on shared interests and genuine mutual support. My home was a true reflection of my taste, filled with things that brought me peace and light. One spring afternoon, sunlight was streaming through the big windows of my townhouse. I was practicing a complex Bach fugue on my piano, my fingers finally finding their old agility. I stumbled in a tricky transition, and instead of the old frustration, a genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest. I started the piece again from the beginning, and in that moment of Simple, joyful persistence, I had the defining epiphany of my journey, my life, was no longer a reaction to an ending. It was an original composition. It was not the duet I had once rehearsed, for but a rich, complex, and powerful solo work. It contained movements of deep sorrow and movements of soaring. Joy, it had rests of profound peace and crescendos of hard-won triumph. It was uniquely, beautifully, and resiliently unbroken. The restoration I speak of was not a return to a former self. That young girl who loved Chopin and art history was gone, claimed by time and experience, nor was it about becoming someone entirely new. It was a process of integration, a conscious gathering of all my selves: the hopeful young bride, the devoted mother, the betrayed wife, the competent professional, the weary warrior, the rediscovered pianist, the solitary hiker, the art seeker, the resilient survivor. I invited them all to the table, allowed them all a voice. In who I was becoming, I was forged in the fire of loss, not into something harder, but into something more flexible, more compassionate, and infinitely stronger. I learned that bravery is not the absence of fear, it is the daily conscious decision to move forward with that fear. As your companion, it is getting out of bed on a morning shrouded in despair. It is playing a clumsy scale on a cheap keyboard. It is smiling at your own reflection until you begin to believe it. It is sitting in a restaurant alone and genuinely enjoying your own company. It is telling your story as I am telling it now, without your voice breaking, because you know it is not a story of defeat, but of arduous rebirth. My story, of course, continues. There are still moments, a certain song on the radio, the smell of sawdust in the air, a particular quality of autumn light that can bring a fleeting wave of old sadness. There are still lonely Saturday nights. But the seismic difference is this: those feelings no longer have the power to capsize me. I built my own vessel. I learned to navigate these waters. I am the captain now. To any woman hearing this, in the thick of your own unraveling, lost in the suffocating fog of a pain that feels endless, I would say this: your pain is real, it is deep, it is sacred. And you will not always feel this way. Listen for that quiet, almost forgotten voice, the one that whispers of what you loved before the world defined you by your relationship. Heed its call, no matter how faint. Follow it by the keyboard, enroll in the class, take the hike, go to the movie alone. And savor the silence. Let your true friends hold you up, and your knees buckle. Let your children see you struggle, and more importantly, let them see you rise. Again and again, your bravery lives not in grand gestures, but in the small, relentless acts of continuation, in the daily choice to put one foot in front of the other. One day, you will look up and realize the landscape has changed. The air will feel different on your skin. You will have changed, you will have carried yourself across a vast and terrifying desert. And on the other side, you will find not just survival, but a life that is different, perhaps more authentic and more beautiful, precisely for the scars it bears. You will be unbroken, not because you were never shattered, but because you gathered every single fractured piece, and with patience and courage and golden glue of your own, making you assembled a masterpiece, you will become a symphony, complex, layered, resonant, and profoundly your own. And the music, my dear, will be glorious.